Hi, I'm Luca Gilmore from South West TAFE, and this is Mark from Brophy. What do you do at Brophy, Mark?
Work in youth homelessness.
Awesome, and that's why we're here today. So we've created a film about interesting people in Warrnambool, and all the money goes into care packages for youth homelessness.
Yep, really appreciate that. Thank you, Luca, and all
Thanks.
the crew at South West TAFE. It is a big deal for young people to come in and ask for help around youth homelessness. So to be able to provide them some dignity packs and a sense of dignity and worth, it's really valuable. Thank you.
Enjoy the film.
The ocean means to not only myself, but to a lot of Indigenous people. It's the way our people survived, our ancestors survived, by using the coast. Now the ocean is very, very powerful and very significant to Indigenous people. My name's Robbie Lowe. I'm virtually a storyteller of some of our history in Warrnambool, surrounding areas. It's important history that we got, and I think it's important that we tell whoever's keen enough to listen to it. We've actually lived in Warrnambool probably 55 years. I was actually raised on a mission station just outside of Warrnambool. And the things that I witnessed on the mission station, you wouldn't believe. But we had to survive that and come in to live in the town, and the things that we had to do in town to survive, people took petitions out against us to live in Warrnambool. So, but no one knows that. Point Ricci is one of the, or could be one of the oldest sites in Australia. And it's important that we try to protect it as best we can. That's both non-Indigenous and Indigenous. Because there's so many sites just here. That site behind us. There's a Hubbin site. There's a fire site. Them dunes over there. That's one huge mitten that goes right back to Granny's grave. So the history here is very important. But it's important to everyone, not only Indigenous people. You know, like we get tours from different parts of the country that comes here. But what do they see in you know, you can read a sign up there, but the sign doesn't tell the full story about the history. It's like where we stand now. We stand on our traditional land, Peakerong. But if we go over there to where that dune is, where that bit of sand, we're in someone else's country. But that's our boundary. And a lot of people don't know that. Our boundary starts here and it goes right through to the Warrnambool River. So that's our boundary, what we call our boundary, or Peakerong people. The dunes are full of history. The dunes are full of culture. The dunes are full of survival for our people that lost their lives in this area. But you don't see it anywhere around Warrnambool. It's not acknowledged. And that's one of the things that I've been trying to do, not only myself, but a few other people, is trying to get that message slowly out there about our history and our culture and what our people did to survive. Like this site here, the survival site. This is where they gathered their food. This is where they cooked their food and survived. just down the, not far from here, is a massacre site. No one knows about that. Just over there on the swamp, heading up to the wild platform, is the last meeting area of our Indigenous people that met using what we call a message stick. Do people know that? I think people need to understand that we have history right on Warrnambool's back door, and no one knows about it. People might have taken notice over the last 5 or 6 years, but up to then, no. Like, we did a school program, and the school teachers are crying out, why can't these be taught in schools? Well, why not? Some of the history that we talk about and show people is a shock to a lot of the people that we take on tours. Because most of the time they live in Warrnambool and they don't know us on their doorstep. You can start here and you can walk right through the Port Ferry, right through to Portland, and you'll see evidence of how our ancestors survived by using the ocean for food source, a lot of other things. But also, the sea is an area where a lot of our ancestors lost their lives through no fault of their own, through massacres, been forced off cliffs, families, young ones, burial sites through the dunes. Now the ocean is very, very powerful and very significant to Indigenous people.
So my name is Caroline Healy, and I'm an artist here in Warrnambool, and I paint the ocean a lot. I love the ocean. Well, even though I'm from away from the ocean, I've always been drawn to it, and for me it's freedom. Like, I look at the ocean and it's like my body takes a deep breath of, and I release. And so for me it's relaxation, but it's also freedom and excitement, and it's always changing. And I think that's what I love about the ocean, because the light's always changing on it and the colours of the ocean are changing. So it's drama, and it's also really good to get into. I love bodyboarding, so getting underneath the ocean is also an amazing feeling. You come out and you feel so alive. I'm from England, from a little village in Surrey, which is sort of near-ish London, but it has like a cricket pitch in the middle and a little pub that overlooks the cricket pitch, and it's very cute. And when I was backpacking, I was thinking, what do I want from my life? And I was writing a sort of like a wish list, and one of the wish list items was a small town on the coast, and then I met someone I fell in love with who brought me back to a small town on the coast. It was all pretty good. I'd always loved art, but living in London, it felt like there was a lot of competition. And I did 1 year of art school, and it was the 90s, and it was very conceptual. And as you can see, I'm quite a figurative painter. And I didn't really feel there was a space for me in the art world at that point. And then I got into other jobs much later, and I traveled a lot. And much later on one of my travel trips, I just was drawing and sketching, as I always did. And I met a lady in a shop, and she saw my sketchbook and she just wanted to buy half the sketchbook. And that was really encouraging. A few other things happened like that. And I slowly developed my art business. And then coming to Warrnambool really, really helped that, because Warrnambool is a very supportive community, and I love it here, and everyone's been really helpful, whether they've been in the art community or whether they've been just general people not connected so much with art, but they have bought my work. Now my business is pretty successful, and it's largely due to the ocean here and largely due to the community here. So painting like this would take me anything from 20 hours to 40 hours. So the client for this one took a photo, this often happens, of what the kind of thing he wanted, but I know the kind of photo that I would like, and so I went to the same place and took another photo on a different sort of day, different weather, and then ran it by him and he said yes. So yes, that's from my own photo, but guided by the client. And then this one, I don't know whether you can see it in the shot, but this one's a drone shot, and I don't have a drone, but I do love drone shots because I just think it's a bit like seeing everything through a mirror. Like, it's the world you know from a completely different perspective, and so I have a lot of fun looking at the drone pictures and a lot of like respect for the drone photographers. This one's a lady called Bridget Forrest, and she's on Instagram. But there are lots of great local drone photographers and general photographers in Warrnambool. Warrnambool has a great art community. If I had to change one thing about Warrnambool, it's really hard because, you know, everyone says, oh, I wish it was warmer. But then if it was warmer, we wouldn't have rainbow season and the dramatic skies and the same vegetation. And so I don't really wish to change the weather. I don't really wish to change anything. I just wish that there was better access for me personally to get back to England, but not for anyone else, because otherwise Warrnambool will become overrun. And I love Warrnambool just the way it is. I don't want the trains to be faster or the airports to be, the major international ones, to be closer and to be closer to Melbourne, really, because that would change the very nature of Warrnambool, and I love Warrnambool just the way it is.
Okay, my name's Peter Ronald, and I guess these days I qualify as an old salt. I've had quite a bit of time and association with the sea over many years now. I cut my teeth diving on shipwrecks in the 70s, went from then to maritime museums and more shipwreck stuff, and then ultimately I was a commercial abalone diver for 15 years out of Warrnambool and Port Fairy. The attraction of Warrnambool, I grew up in Tirang, and from there we would dive on the shipwrecks at Peterborough, Port Campbell. So really my fascination with the ocean started at a very early time. And Warrnambool being on the ocean, where Tirang is inland, it was just a logical place to move to with the diving that I was familiar with in the area, the shipwrecks, the Maritime Museum that started that I was closely involved in for a very long time. So that was the attraction. We had, my wife and I had 7 years in Tassie until a few years ago, and came back to Warrnambool with, you know, family connections. But it's a great spot. It really is. It's a lovely, in a sense, a coastal village, but also a city. So it's got a lot going for it. My time as an abalone diver was particularly interesting. I mean, it only involved, on average, about 40 days work a year. So I used to jokingly say that all the rest of the time was planning and preparation, maintenance. In fact, it was leading a full life and having a lot of fun. But I caught's a funny word with abalone, but harvested about over 300 tonnes of abalone in that time. And the problem with catching abalone is there's only one way to do it, and that's one at a time. Ship him off the rocks, put him in a bag. It's a slow, laborious task. But I really enjoyed it. For 15 years, it was just a boy's own adventure. It was, you never knew from one day to the next what was going to happen, what you're going to come across or see. It was just a lovely experience of living off the ocean. One of the things that concerned me about abalone diving before I did it was the potential of boredom. It's like it's just routine, monotonous stuff. And what I realised, to my surprise pretty early in the piece, was that it became an automatic function. You'd be chipping abalone off the bottom, and then when you'd finish that patch, I found I'd automatically be moving to the next patch, which would be just kind of in your peripheral vision. And what I realised was that this was becoming a subconscious function, and that subconsciously you're scanning the rest of the bottom so that you know where to move to next. So the more automatic that became, the more it freed your mind up to do all sorts of things, you know, write letters to the editor of the paper, or make up jokes, or think about what you're going to do for holidays or any number of things, but your mind would just kind of wander off in all directions. There was one day I remember diving off Port Fairy, and I had in my mind coming up with a joke, and it was, the kind of the gist of the joke was, what makes how do you make a Shih Tzu cross? Was kind of the question. I was coming up with all these answers as I'm diving. And the problem is when you laugh underwater, your mask leaks, so you get water in your mask. And then I had to explain when I finally came up for like morning tea or lunch to the deckhand why I was just rolling around laughing when I got back in the boat. He thought I was gone insane, but it was just part of the entertainment of making the day go by in a best way you could. Whilst your mind might be wandering in other areas, there's also a reality of the situation you're in, where your life from minute to minute depends on your access to air and not being eaten by something. So you you're mindful of that stuff too, and the amount of time you spend, what your catch rate is. You need to maintain a certain catch rate to make the day worthwhile. So there's a mixture of that in and out of consciousness and the subconscious activities as well. But a lot to keep me entertained. I mean, just the marine life from day to day, hour to hour. The seals at Julia Percy, where I spent most of my diving, were just so entertaining. They're like pups, like dogs that are just coming around and playing and tugging at you and just helping entertain you during the day's diving. At Julia Percy, you were certainly very aware when the seals left. Their company was kind of reassuring, and there were times when they would just, for no apparent reason, all leave, go somewhere else, or get up in the rocks. And a reasonable explanation of that would be the presence of a shark. But the thing about abalone diving is if you are totally preoccupied by sharks, you wouldn't be able to do it. So my philosophy, like at Julia Percy, sharks eat seals, there are seals there, and there are occasionally going to be sharks. You'd see seals with bites and scars, so it was all very real. But when you're abalone diving, the only way you can do it is basically lie on the bottom, crawling around, focused on the bottom, picking up abalone. So if you were to spend any of your time looking around at jumping at shadows, you couldn't sustain it. So my theory was that if I'm just simply stuck to the bottom, focused on my work and minded my own business, the sharks will do the same. And that worked perfectly for 15 years. Absolutely, sharks were part of the equation. The sharks that I saw that I had kind of hand-to-hand combat with were 7-gill sharks. Not at Julia Percy, mainly along the coast. And in the early days, this was literally, you had a bag of abalone. The slime coming off the abalone trail is attracting the sharks because they're hungry. So they're coming in and they want to have a chew on something. So all you had for defence was an abalone iron, just a short chisel. So on a number of occasions, you'd give the sharks a whack and scare them off. The worst encounter really was the last one, where I got circled consistently by the 7-gill shark, went to a fair bit of trouble to try and kind of have it lose interest. It swam past quite closely and I got a good whack at it with the abalone iron, and it did two things. It hit me in the side of the head with its tail, which dislodged my mask, so that doesn't help your visibility. And the other thing it did was started to turn around and come back at me. And at that point I wondered whether that was actually a wise decision on my part. Swam up to the boat and surfaced, and it followed under my feet to get to the boat. So that was kind of the hairiest experience. But that was all before we had the electric shark repellents. As soon as they became available, I bought one of the South African models, and then later the shark shields, the more refined ones. And in the years, I can't remember say if I dived for 15 years, I'd say I had the shark shields for probably the last 7 to 10. I had access to them. And in those instances, whenever you saw a shark, it would come close, but turn and go away. I'd never had any physical contact with any sharks after I started wearing the shark shield. So I was convinced that they worked. Not necessarily a guarantee, but I used to say, like wearing a seatbelt in a car accident, you're better wearing it than not because it's got a chance of saving your life. So I had great faith in the electric shark repellents. The problem with those was they surrounded you with an electric volt, just a jolt. And you were never aware of it unless you worked into a narrow canyon, which would focus the electricity back on you, or if you surfaced and the rat tail, the electrode, got kind of around your body or around your head. And what you'd feel at that point is the electricity hitting the fillings of your teeth. And so, to go through your brain into your teeth to be feeling it it's not a pleasant experience, but it was better than being eaten by sharks. I don't dive much. I mean, I think I calculated it was 3,000 or 4,000 hours of time underwater, and loved it when I did it. I do a bit of snorkeling now, but I feel like I satisfied all my underwater desires then between shipwrecks and the time I spent abalone diving. So I miss the boating activity. Herring around in boats is really something I've always enjoyed and still do. I've been a member of the Coast Guard here in Warrnambool for 2 days, but I'm enjoying that so far. So that'll give me a chance to keep the salt in the veins, and I'm really looking forward to doing more of that.
Hi, my name is Alicia Belgrove. I'm a senior lecturer in marine biology and ecology. Essentially, I'm a marine biologist and specialising in seaweeds. So I teach the undergraduate program and I supervise PhD students and honours students doing their own research projects. And I also do my own research and I lead the Deakin Seaweed research team. I came to Warrnambool for my job here at Deakin University. So prior to coming to Warrnambool, I'd actually been living in Japan for 3 years. And so I came back to Australia and then down to Warrnambool. Japanese culture and Australian culture are quite different with respect to the way the sea is both valued and used. In the context that, I guess as Australians, I think we, first and foremost see the ocean as our playground, and the hanging out at the beach or surfing or diving or whatever that might be. Whereas from the Japanese perspective, I think that the top of the list is, it's food, it's resource, it's their paddock, because it's such a mountainous country that they have so little land on which they can actually produce their food, that a lot of their food comes from the sea. Australia, and this part of Australia in particular, is incredibly diverse in regards to its seaweed flora. We have the greatest global diversity of seaweeds anywhere in the world. And importantly, most of them are endemic to this region. So around about, on average, 60% of the seaweeds that are in our little patch of water out here don't occur anywhere else in the world. They can be food, they can be medicines, they can be, all sorts of applications in biotech. It's really just so many opportunities, but we have to, I guess, act on that potential. And one of the challenges is that because there so many species that are so underexplored, that there's so much research that we need to do in that space. What would I change about one of them? The wind. I could do without that. It's the ocean and the incredible diversity within that ocean that keeps me here on this spectacular bit of coast.
My name's Paul Tinkler. I'm the Senior Marine Technical Officer here at Deakin and the Boating and Diving Officer. And largely I'm involved in research, sort of facilitating research, marine research for Deakin, but and a little bit of teaching stuff as well. Take students out on Yolla a couple of times a year for a bit of an experience. I just got back last night from the most recent research trip, which was in Port Phillip Bay on Yolla to tag and measure and get morphometrics on the giant spider crab migration that happens every year in Port Phillip Bay. So we tagged 50 crabs last week and measured about another 500. They're in, and they're just off St Leonard's at the moment. You can snorkel out to them in about 2 metres of water. It's really cool. There was tens of thousands of them all aggregated, and they don't really know where they go after that. So we've set up an acoustic array around Port Phillip Bay and across Port Phillip Heads, and the tags will trigger those if they move in and out of the heads or around the bay, because we're trying to figure out what happens. They aggregate to molt and then they take off and no one knows where they go. So that's what we were doing there. That was pretty cool. Yeah. Why Warrnambool? I am from Geelong originally. I came to Deakin quite a long time ago, maybe 25 years ago, to study undergraduate in aquatic science, which is now called marine biology. That's how come I ended up in Warrnambool the first time. I took off, travelled all over the place for quite a long time in between, but then got a good job here and came back because I love the place. Lots of stuff to do here, especially if you're into the marine environment. Grew up as a child fishing with my old man off St Leonard's and around Geelong, and loved it, and that pretty much started it all. Started snorkeling, got into scuba diving, started a degree in aquatic science. Yeah, I went for a dive off Ningaloo Reef in another job before coming here once, and it was a night dive to film sea urchins, which are really boring. Staying just to see if they were coming out at night. Seems like a very plain, ordinary thing to do until a 2.5 metre grey reef shark came cruising along, got a bit startled by the cameras and smashed into us in 6 metres of water, knocked the lights off the cameras. We were in complete darkness, couldn't see the shark anymore, fearing for it's like something out of Jaws. There you go. Got chased out of the water a couple of times manta towing around the Rolly Shoals, and which by grey reef sharks again. Manta towing is getting towed behind a boat with a board attached to the like a ski rope with your snorkeling gear on, and you tilt the board and take a breath and you fly down through the water. It's really cool. I got chased out by a couple of sharks off the Rolly Shoals, off one of the atolls out there. It's about 150 nautical miles off Broome. And I got back in the boat and my mate was there. 2 of my mates on the boat were giving me a fair bit of stick for getting out. And the next day, as I was manta towing again, I hear this rattling noise, and I look beside me, and there's my fishing lure swimming next to me, and I look up and my mate is dragging my lure along next to me beside the boat, and they stuffed a pilchard in the rope in front of the manta board.
I'm Paddy Finnegan, and I am a member of the Australian Coast Guard, and I'm stationed here in Warrnambool. So I would have been in the Coast Guard for approximately 10 years. I served for 7 years on Port Phillip Bay, and I've had about 3 years here. I love the ocean. I grew up on the sea and grew up in boats, and it's a really good way for me to keep my seamanship skills up to date, and it's a really good way to serve the community. Not only our local community, but of course in the summertime all our visitors that come down as well. I moved back to Warrnambool after the COVID lockdowns in Melbourne. I decided I didn't want to live in the big city anymore, so I've moved back here to Warrnambool for that reason. Yeah. But I grew up here, I went to school here, and it's a much nicer place to live. What I like about the sea is just how much it can change, and its wildness, its ruggedness, its beauty. It's the smell of the ocean, the look of the ocean. It's it's just me. I could never live in the middle of Australia. I could never live away from the ocean. Yeah. So the difference between Coast Guard in Melbourne and the Coast Guard in Warrnambool is Coast Guard in Melbourne is very busy because there are so many boats on Port Phillip Bay, and you get constantly called out, especially when the snapper season starts. So we start at dawn and finish at dusk. We might do 10 rescues in a day. Typically people their boat breaks down, they get a flat battery, or the boat won't start. But every now and then something really serious happens. So I've done four searches, and there have been 4 deceased people. So that was always very difficult. And the tragedy in each of these cases, the person would have been alive so we do all the calculations, we do drift patterns and temperature. So that person would have been alive, considering the temperature, the water and the sea conditions, if they had been wearing a life jacket. So life jackets save lives. The Coast Guard boat in Warrnambool, so it's twin jets, and it's very difficult to drive. You can't just hop in and off you go. You have to be trained in how to operate the boat. And out here, if something goes wrong, it's really bad. So big oceans, and what can happen is people come down in the summer and they're used to going out on Port Phillip Bay where it's calm all day, and they come down here in their little tinny, and it's a nice morning, you know, but they don't look at the weather. So it's a nice calm in the morning, and then the ocean blows up in the afternoon, as it often does, and they're in strife, and that's when we have to go out to get them. The other things that when things go wrong, it can really go wrong. So if one of our commercial fishing boats got into trouble, you know. So on the boat, you go down underneath, there's a shower, there's a toilet, there are 4 beds, there's a galley, that's a kitchen, and it's got food, kettle, hot water. So we've got the whole lot's there if we needed to use it. So the Coast Guard's role is not just search and rescue, it's also about education of the community and support. And so a good day for us is when we go out on the water and we come home and we haven't had to rescue anyone, because everyone's been educated in boating safety, everyone's wearing their life jacket, everyone knows the procedure to do if something goes wrong. Some people think we're border force, like we go out, you know, look for people smugglers. That's not our role. Some people think we come out to check your fishing licences. That's not our role. Our role is to save lives. There have been occasions where we go out and we catch someone out of the water, and then their boat's been, you know, washed up on the rocks, and they want us to tow their boat out. We don't do that. Okay, we're not, because that's salvage. And in the past, you know, many years ago, before all the rules came in, there were cases where the people were rescued out of the water, and then the rescue boat went out to try to salvage the other boat, and then the rescue boat got into trouble. Yeah, and we've had that happen. We had a very sad case in Port Campbell where a rescue boat went out to save somebody, and it got caught in a rogue wave and it flipped and 2 people died. So we've got to be very careful out there.
My name's Keith Prest. I'm Deputy Flotilla Commander of the local Coast Guard unit here in Warrnambool. I'm also one of the skippers of the boat, and I also managed to get my hands dirty. So we've had this boat since 2008. I haven't been a member that long. I've been in the Coast Guard about 9 years, so picked up a fair bit of sea time and local knowledge in that time. I think one of our biggest problems is we don't have a lot of call-outs, and but then when we do get a call-out, it's often very serious. So I've been involved in 3 different searches, looking for people lost at sea, and then we often, the other one we get is people who their boats have broken down. So we find that that's a pretty common problem, but we don't get a lot of them. I think a lot of the Warrnambool seafarers are pretty careful. You know, they've got big boats and they look after them, which is good. And I think to some degree our breakwater there has got a very bad reputation. So people don't tend to go out when it's a bit rough at the boat ramp, and that's a good thing because it means they don't get into trouble. But these days, anyone who's in emergency sort of response teams has to do what's called a dynamic risk assessment, where you work out what the dangers to you and your crew are and how they can be minimised, or if they can be minimised. And then the skipper on the day has to make a call. So we work in conjunction with the chopper, and sometimes with the chopper we do actual exercises where they lower their guys onto our deck. So that's a simulation of where we might pick someone out of the water who's in a really bad way, and the fastest way to get them to the hospital is to put them in the chopper. So we do that from time to time. The chopper can get out in conditions faster than what we can, and there was one time we had to go to the shelf, which is 3 hours from here by sea and probably 20 minutes by helicopter. So guess who won that one? You know, they got there and they saved the day, they saved the guy, which is fantastic. But other times they can't get out with weather, or they're not available, or at night time they can't go at night. One of the last tows we did, we towed a boat from way down to the east back to Warrnambool, and when we were coming into Warrnambool it was pitch black, and the sea was probably 3 metres, and as we're coming into Warrnambool someone said, "By golly, the lights of Warrnambool have just gone out, there must be a blackout." And then we looked down and we realised that it was actually just, we were in the bottom of a big wave. So all the lights just disappeared. It was pitch black. You know. So it's all different at night time. Yeah. I love being involved with the sea, and I've been in Warrnambool for a number of years, and I came here because in the early days I windsurfed, and I thought it'd be a great place to windsurf, which it is about 3 days a year. It's good. The rest of the time it's not that good. But after that I got involved with the yacht club, and I learnt to scuba dive, and then more recently I've been involved with the Coast Guard, got my own fishing boat, and one of my passions is kiteboarding. So I spend a lot of time on the water, and I think I've got a reasonable respect for it. My wife wouldn't agree.
My name's Colleen and I'm a freelance video producer, and in my not so free time I collect plastic off the beach, try to work out where it's coming from, and where possible try to stop it at source. I grew up in Warrnambool. As a teenager I couldn't wait to get out, and because I was into video production, the only place for that was in Melbourne, so I moved to Melbourne, and about 15 years ago, I decided to move down just for a year or so, and the opportunities, have changed in that time, and there was more work for video down here, so, and I've stayed. The sea, I've always had a great connection with the sea. I grew up in South Warrnambool. Summertime was an awesome time. Our family went camping, loved swimming, loved snorkeling, and it's always been a place that I've gone to when I guess, you know, life's a bit crap. I'm going to go for a walk to the ocean, walk along. It gives me a great sense of peace. What keeps me here in Warrnambool? I think the ocean, my family, friends. There's a really great community down here. The population's quite low, so I can still go for a walk along here 2 or 3 hours and not see anyone, and I actually quite like that. What would I change? I guess I'd like to see more people valuing the environment. As soon as you start going up the coast, there's a lot of people that really value their environment because there's a lot of trees and stuff like that. And down here, we don't seem to have that. What we do have is this, you know, beautiful coastal areas. And unfortunately, a lot of people do use it as a bit of a dumping ground. So I'd really love to see that, the attitude change, and actually people to really value what we've got. Seeing the environment and looking after the environment as everyone's responsibility, I think is really important. And if you start thinking like, what can you do, rather than like someone else should do something about that, thinking about like, well, what could I do about that? Or, oh, it's not going to take me long just to, you know, clean this up. Or, so I think having more of an attitude of sort of ownership and stewardship to the environment. I think one of the craziest things I ever found was a submarine flare that was about 60 years old. It had washed up on Terry's Beach down in Nullawarre. I didn't know what it was. It was kind of this big, you know, metal thing. And I took it home, and usually on Facebook, I'll put up a post and anyone knows what this is, and everyone was trying to guess. And anyway, the next day, I was looking at like cylinders found on beaches, and this picture popped up, and it looked like just what I'd found, and on it said, do not touch this, call the military immediately. And so I called my cousin who's a policeman, and I said, oh, I found this thing. And then all of a sudden, you know, 10 minutes later, I had the bomb squad on the phone, and they're like, you know, where is it? You know, is anyone in the house? You know, you have to leave your house immediately. You know, how close are your neighbours? We might have to close down the whole street. And I was just freaking out. And and then an hour or so later, they rang back and go, no, it's not a bomb, but it's a submarine flare. And the military are on their way from Melbourne. So in 3 hours, this military rocked up and took it away. So that was pretty cool. Interesting. Yeah. But you find all sorts of stuff that you don't expect to wash up on the beach. Like one of my first things I found was like a dialysis kit, like a full kit, you know. Just last month I found a bomb, sorry, not a bomb, a BOM weather balloon, and apparently they get twice a day these balloons go up, and then at some stage they've got to come down, and they've got all these components like foam, plastic, batteries. So I found one of those. I also found this wildlife marine tracker, and that looked like, about this size with an antenna. And I tracked it back to the manufacturer, and then they, tracked it back to the scientists, and that had been harpooned onto a shark in South Australia, and then that washed up here. So you find really cool things all the time, and that's partly why I love cleaning up the beaches. Like, you never know what you're going to find, and every day's kind of a bit of an adventure. These are our top 5. This is plastic stem cotton buds, and these the reason we get so many along this beach here is because people, we've got a sewage outfall just near Thunder Point, so people flush these down the toilet and they get through the filters and end up in the ocean. So yes, we have collected thousands and thousands of those. Fishing rope scraps. Fishing rope's made out of a plastic nylon, which doesn't break down, so it breaks up into smaller fibers, and this is really dangerous, like for birds and fish, because they get entangled in this kind of material. We have lids. Lids are also in our top 5. So what happens when bottles are lidded in the ocean? The bottles eventually break up, the actual bottle part, but the lid is actually highly buoyant, and that just remains floating on the ocean surface. These ones here, interestingly enough, they're all like aqua branded. And so we find these ones every single week, and these are actually from Indonesia. They're not even Australian sold bottles. We think they possibly could have come off boats and ships rather than floated here, but it's really hard to tell. This is our number 2. After nurdles is actually plastic hard remnants. So these are plastic items which are broken down into smaller and smaller pieces. And these become really dangerous because they end up getting, birds and fish can actually ingest these. And you see those terrible pictures online of, when they open up birds and they're full of these plastic hard remnants. So as I said, plastic doesn't break down, it breaks up and up and up and up, and eventually becomes this sort of plastic dust. And as you may have seen, if you look, follow this stuff on the World Wide Web, a lot of this stuff ends up where, humans are eating it because it's in the fish and whatever. Okay, so this is our big campaign at the moment we've got on. So if you see this here is a drink bottle. It looks a bit mucky because it's got a few cigarette butts in there as well. But this is non-food spring. This is a Chinese water bottle. So we collect these types of bottles. Here is another one, American, not actually from America. It's actually a Malaysian branded drink bottle. Another one here. This is Mastercong, another Chinese bottle. So along this coast here, this is the type of bottle. We find more of these types of bottles than Australian sold bottles, and we believe they're coming off the international ships going by. You can see the brands, the labels are really quite fresh. And on most of the bottles, you'll find a date stamp of when they were packaged. And so they're usually within 2 months. So it would take about 8 or 10 years for something like this to float from Asia to get to our shores. So we know that they're being lidded off the ships. So at the moment, we're running a bit of a campaign called Bottles Overboard, trying to get more beachcombers to take photos when they see these bottles, and we're actually trying to understand how big the problem is so we can start, lobbying the government to do something about it.
G'day, my name's Gary Ryan. I'm a rock lobster fisherman here in Warrnambool. Just completed my 21st season, so started next financial year, beginning my 22nd season. It's funny, I feel like I've only been doing it a day, and it's one of those primary production things, I guess, that unless you're third generation, people don't think you've been, you're just a newcomer. It's a bit like that. I guess, look, I grew up in Dennington near the Mirror River, and I just always loved, I think the hunter-gatherer instinct's pretty strong in me. I just love being outside. Love fishing. Fished for a long time as an amateur before I became commercial. And one day, like, I actually took a day off work. I used to be a tailor at Fletcher Jones. Had a roster day off, and I was out fishing, and I saw the commercial guys coming home, and they were making money, and it was costing me money to be there. And I thought, I'm nuts, you know. I've got to change this and start doing it commercially. But ever since I was a little boy, it's what I wanted to do. My oldest memory of my childhood was one day pulling up down here in the car with my mum and dad on a Saturday morning after doing the groceries, and dad asking the old question, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I saw a crayfishman just come around the corner of the breakwater as he asked me. I said, I want to be just like him. I want to be a fisherman. And my old man said, don't be a bum. Sorry, but he did. There's a couple of young fellas who started up now. They sort of, when they're young, they call them wharf rats, because they just hang around. They come out for rides for fun and all that sort of stuff. And then them two guys are now running their own businesses, running their own boats. One started coming out with me when he was 12 years old. And now he actually owns that boat out there now, the one furthest on the left. And the other fella owns the Sea Gypsy out here, the silver one in the middle, which is one of my old boats as well. But, you know, yeah, they started coming out when they were kids. And I wish more kids would do it, to be honest, come down and get off the computer games and stuff and get out in the great outdoors and see what the world's really about. Both those guys, they haven't worked with me exclusively, but spent some time on the boat for sure. And I teach them everything. Like some fishermen really guard their secrets, if you know what I mean. I want people to work for me who want to get up in the morning, who want to go to work and want to learn, because they're good company to be around, because they're picking your brain for everything you got. And I try to teach them everything I know, even though one day, like these two young fellas here, are going to be in direct competition. But if you don't pass it on, well, everyone loses. When you first start, you'd think it's the hardest job on the planet. But as you get into a bit of a routine, learn how to pick pots up, learn how to use the movement of the boat to your advantage, it becomes pretty easy. But it's not for everyone. But look, at the very, very start, I guess it was just freedom. To me, it was the last great frontier. No roads to follow, go where you want, when you want, how you want, fast as you want, slow as you want. Wind in your hair, spray on your face. It just felt free. But I love the extremities of it. I love the calmness on some days when it's just beautiful sunrise, dead calm, beautiful. And I love the other extremity like today. Although, you know, it gets a lot worse than today, but just rough as guts. Well, when I first started, I was in a 20-foot runabout, twin engine, just a little 20-foot runabout. And it was a really good boat for fishing in, really close, and all nooks and crannies and all the rest of it. When I say nooks and crannies, get right up against the cliffs and amongst the reefs and stuff. You can catch a lot in there. And for sure, I know one day I was stuck. There's two reefs, reef on either side of me, cliffs behind me, and the swell was kicking a little bit. But I had pots inside, and I had to get in to get them. So I've zipped in, and as I was hauling them, just set after set come through, these huge waves breaking right across the front. So I was trapped, and I couldn't get out. So I had the boat going forward and astern and forward and astern, just biding me time. And as soon as the swells dropped off, there was a bit of a lull, just flat out of there and got out. And like, I was played footy about an hour and a half later. I was getting changed to play footy, and I was still shaking an hour and a half later. I was still been boots up, and my hands were shaking. It was terrifying. Like, to me, it was like a madman holding a gun to your head and not knowing I was going to pull the trigger. Because one of those big waves had to come through and just didn't, and because they broke out the front and then greened off. I didn't have much room. But if one of them had broke all the way through, like history straight away. It's probably just one, but it may have been, a bit mad back then, I suppose.
My name's Chrissy Duncan, and I am the Programme Coordinator for SWTAFE Surf Therapy. I've been in Warrnambool for 10 years. Before I was in Warrnambool, I was in the northeast of Scotland. Well, I was moving to Australia, and then there was a job came up in Warrnambool, and I thought, where's Warrnambool? So I thought, yeah, that sounds like a good place. So it was very random. I moved to Warrnambool to work at the Youth Foyer, which is a supported housing project for young people. So the SWTAFE program came about during COVID, when everything was closed. So the playgrounds were closed, schools were closed, birthday parties were cancelled, sport was cancelled. Everyone was feeling a bit depressed and stuck in their houses. But the one thing you could still do was kind of be in the ocean, and surfing became really popular. And I do a bit of surfing, and I was surfing with a friend, and we were out the back one day, and the birds were flying, and the ocean was glassy, and it was just amazing. And we thought, far out, like, we work with young people, we should have them out in the ocean. So we thought, let's start some surf therapy. So we applied for a little grant, and we started SWTAFE. So the program has 3 components. So we say it's yarn, surf, eat. So the yarn section is where everyone gets together, and we have a yarn circle, and then we talk about things like mental health and healthy relationships, or drugs and alcohol. And sometimes we get people with lived experience to come in and talk to the group. So we might have someone who's had a journey with mental health or a journey with drug and alcohol use, and they share their story. And then after we've had a bit of a yarn, everyone gets in the ocean, and we have a big surf lesson together. And we say it's like getting a good dose of vitamin C. So we just feel the therapeutic benefits of the ocean, and it was a good chance to get away from devices and to kind of leave your problems on the beach. And there's no pressure. Some people want to surf, some people just want to float or body surf. So we have a big surf together, and then at the end we eat together. So we share some hot food together. We've got young participants, young people aged between 14 and 25, and then we match that with locals. So we've got community volunteers as well that join the program. So we have all sorts of random people, like engineers or bus drivers, surfers, teachers. So we all share some food together and connect, and that program goes for 6 weeks. Yeah. So I never used to have a connection with the ocean. When I first moved to Australia, I was really scared of it. I thought it was crocodiles and sharks, and there's no way I'm ever getting in there. And then I kind of, I met a partner who surfed, and I lived in a house share full of people that surfed. And to be honest, I really resented it because they were all really cool and they all surfed, and all they talked about was surfing, and they'd go away surfing. And I used to think, oh God, it's all they talk about, or they think they're so cool. But I suppose once I started doing that, I'm kind of pointing the finger and thinking, oh, they're all so lame. And I started doing that, and I started to realize that actually I was probably just felt really left out, and I lacked the confidence to give it a try, or I was worried what people would think, or I was worried that I couldn't do it. So it took a few years, and then finally I got myself I thought I'm just going to get a board, and I got myself a big 8-foot foam board, and I just dragged it down to the beach every week relentlessly, and I just fell in love with it. Like, the ocean casts a spell on you, and like, the good thing about surfing is that it's hard to learn, but it's not that hard, and you have the winds, so it's a challenge, but when you get it, you're like super stoked with yourself. Yeah, so that was like 8 years ago or something, and yeah, finally, it took a long time, but finally getting there. And especially as like an older female, like I got into surfing when I was in my 30s, and it's doable and it's achievable, and now I've got a little boy, and a lot of mums probably sit on the beach while their husbands surf, but it's good to be out there. The SWTAFE program is about introducing as many people as I can to surfing, and it is achievable, and it's not just for cool people, and it should be really inclusive. So I think that I feel really passionate about that. Did the ocean help me build confidence? 100 million %. Yeah, probably before I got into surfing, I feel like, I probably didn't have a thing. I'd say that, you know, my lifestyle. I had friends, I'd go to festivals, I probably would party a little bit too much. And I probably, you know, did have more of a negative headspace, you know, there was kind of a lot of negativity there, or, you know, you'd wake up in the weekend and you'd maybe have a hangover and you'd think, oh God, like life. And then now I suppose since I've got into surfing, I think it does give you that confidence to want to get up early for a dawn session and go with some friends who have common interests and go exploring the coastline, chasing waves. And then also being the female surfer, I think, especially when you kind of been surfing for a little while now and starting to get it, that feeling of paddling out to a, you know, male-dominated lineup, and then there's not many older females out there surfing, you know, to paddle out and then catch a wave and hold your own, kind of paddling back out to the lineup. It's a good feeling. Yeah. How would I describe Warrnambool in 3 words? I'd say the ocean. I would say good people, even though that's 2. And I would say beautiful.
Oh, that's a really deep one. I think Warrnambool is wonderful, very conservative, and a great place to live. That's too many words. Yeah, very livable.
I would call it the Wild West. Yeah.
3 words to describe Warrnambool. I could describe it in 1 word, but you might have to cut it out. And that's racism.
I'd probably pick 1 word, and it would also describe the ocean, and that's multidimensional. The ocean is multidimensional, and Warrnambool too has many aspects, facets, sides, and dimensions. So Warrnambool, multidimensional.
Yes, my 3 words. I wrote them down in case I forgot the whole 3 words. Community, opportunity, and ocean.
Wild, windy, and wonderful.
Surf. Beach. And family. Got a family here. Little kids. Yeah. It's a great place for kids.
Cool. Beautiful. Opportunity. And home.